Welcome to another episode of Quite Franklin. As usual, I'm your host, Rich Franklin, and today my guest is David Allen Arnold. This is a man who started off sweeping floors in a production company and somehow worked his way into becoming the camera operator inside a helicopter for more shows than I can even remember. He's worked on The Deadliest Catch for 15 seasons, Ice Road Truckers, Axemen, Survivor. He's the Monday Night Football camera operator. The opening shot that you see every Monday night is his shot. He's worked on many major Hollywood movies, everything from Dracula to James Bond. And today we talk about life lessons, near-death experiences that he's had while working on some of these shows in extreme conditions, to the life lessons that he's learned, things about taking risks and how he's been able to make his way without a college degree, not following the typical path that is set before you, making your own way. And ultimately, he ends up telling a story about how he becomes the man that is fighting an organized crime ring in a small town of Sky Forest outside of LA where he lives. And it ultimately teaches us the lesson of don't be a bystander in life. You know, if there's something that you want, if you want to make change, if you want to have a voice about something, speak up about it. This guy has a lot of life lessons. And like me, he's probably, if living like a cat, if he had 9 lives, he's probably burned 8 of them.
Quite frankly, it's kind of unusual.
It's quite Franklin.
Got it. Quite Franklin.
David, how are you doing? Can you see me?
I can see you. I can hear you.
Awesome, man. Awesome. Good to have you on today, man.
Thank you so much.
What is this makeshift apparatus around your microphone there? Like that's some black duct tape or whatever.
It's a really nice microphone, but it's white. So it actually throws the camera off a little bit because it's so bright. So I put some black tape on it to try and darken a little bit so that the light levels on the video would be a little bit better.
I'm going to suggest maybe spray painting it.
I should buy a black one, but I'm just so practical, you know, like I don't want to waste it. And
I'm the same way, man. I'm the kind of person that I'll go spend money on like a nice dinner and not think about the amount of money that I'm spending on the dinner. But then I'll walk by and be like, I need a new pair of shoes. And these Converse are they're $60. And I don't really need them that bad. So I'll contemplate over spending this extra money because I'm such a minimalist as well. So yeah, I'm really bad about that kind of stuff. So I get the logic. Trust me. It resonates with me really well.
Yeah. Your stories resonate with me. I don't know if you know this, but I have listened to every episode of your podcast.
Oh, wow. Let me ask you this. Which one did you like the best?
Honestly, I can honestly say I like all of them. I think that you are going to become one of the most important voices in podcasting. When I started listening to your show, I didn't expect that you would have Elizabeth Smart on.
Oh, wow. Okay.
I actually ordered her book and listened to it because of the stuff I heard on your show. And let's see, I've actually, when you had Jack Garcia on and you talked about getting into the mafia, that's one of the stories that stuck with me the most was when he described eating with the mafia at a restaurant and how to do it.
Yeah.
And I've actually recounted that to people because it's such an amazing thing. And it just gave me such a clear, glimpse into that life that otherwise I would never have known.
Thank you so much. And thanks for tuning in.
No, I really mean it. I also have, I went to Cody O'Connor's Instagram.
Oh yeah.
And I wrote in the comments because now he's walking across the country.
Yeah.
And I said, you just let me know when you want me to meet you out on the road and film with you.
Oh, did you?
So hopefully he'll see that and write back because I don't know where he'll be from one day to the next. But if I'm available, I actually would love to come out and give him a hand and help him get a little bit more footage for what he's doing.
So I'll definitely make sure you guys get connected. I appreciate it because that's what happened. Like I was looking on my Instagram and you kept popping up and commenting on things and stuff. And so finally, I don't spend a whole lot of time on social myself. Like I'm terrible about that stuff. And finally I'm like, who is this person that keeps liking my stuff and commenting? And I clicked on and then I think about the same time your agent reached out to Grace to pull you on the show. And I clicked on your profile. I was like, this guy, his profile, this is a pretty interesting profile. So then I sent your stuff over to Grace and I was like, hey, Grace, who is this guy? And she's like, well, oddly enough, his agent reached out. I was like, well, then let's get him on and let's talk because, yeah, I mean, just after reading a little bit about you. So then subsequently I read the books and everything and it was pretty cool. So yeah, man, funny how the world works. Thanks for the pursuit. Cause I'll tell you what it reminded me of. It reminded me of, how you were talking about in your first book about when you got the job at West Cam and you're like, you sent, it was Ed Silver. You sent him the picture of you, eating the steak or whatever, and to show that you were hungry. Tell the story for the people that are listening.
Well, the number one question that I get, because people see that I fly around the world for TV shows and movies, they see, first of all, they know a helicopter is expensive.
Yeah.
Just intuitively, they just get like that's a big deal to be in a helicopter filming. And then they see the equipment that I use, the gyro stabilized cameras that I operate. They cost $500,000 by themselves, and people see all of that crazy technology, and they recognize, oh wow, this guy has a lot of responsibility and is doing all this crazy stuff. And the first thing that they always ask is, "Did you go to school for this?" And it's a funny answer because I have a high school education, and when I was in high school, I figured out that I wanted to work in the movie business because when I was in high school, that's the only thing we had. We had movies and television. That's all there was. There was no YouTube. There was no Instagram. There were no podcasts.
Same. You and I grew up in that pre-internet generation, man. And I think people are going to talk about this as time goes on is like the prehistoric world. The world where when you got lost, you didn't have a GPS to get you out of it. If you were hiking, you didn't have a cell phone on you. And you were like, if you broke an ankle in the middle of, I don't know, the Rockies, you could very well possibly die. And, because nobody would ever find you. The thought of being at a dinner table and having that conversation like, oh, hey, what's the name of that movie? It has that one guy, he's got the long hair. He was also in that other, oh, I know what you're talking. Oh, and it's like, you couldn't Google stuff. You just had to either figure it out and it would be a collective group effort, which taught you kind of teamwork, or you just were like, you know what, I'm good with not knowing.
Like you say, back in the dark ages is when I was in high school, the only way that you could reach a lot of people was through television and film. So I knew I wanted to do that. And I was as far from Hollywood as you can get, but I didn't let that stop me. I just said, this is what I'm going to do. So I didn't take a job cutting grass. I didn't take a job painting houses. I just said, I'm going to do this job, even though I'm 3,000 miles away from the industry that I want to work
When you
in.
say as far from Hollywood as you can get, like you mean that in the literal sense for the people that haven't read the book. You grew up in Melbourne, Florida?
Yeah, I grew up in Central Florida, and I wound up in Melbourne, and I took a few classes in community college because they had actually a film school at this junior college. And I'll never forget the dean of the students showed me all the classes I had to take to actually get a degree. And they included like typing and a bunch of science classes and, just oddball things that had nothing to do with the career I wanted to have. So I said, no, that's it. I quit. I'm dropping out of school. And he made fun of me in front of all the other students. And he said, who's going to hire you without a degree? And I said, I have no idea, but I'm just going to start working. And so I started to go door to door in this little town in Florida to any company that had anything to do with film or television. And that could include, public access cable. That could include corporate videos, anything. And I would knock on the door and I would introduce myself. Hello, my name is David Allen Arnold. And you don't know me, but I work really hard and I could help you, and I will work for free. And finally, at one of the businesses that I would visit every few weeks, the guy at the front desk had it. He was sick and tired of me showing up.
Persistence.
Yeah, he goes, get lost, get out of here, don't come here again. And he said, all we do are helicopter cameras. We have no use for you. And I said, oh, okay, well, won't bother him again. So I'm so sorry. I scratched him off my list. I'll never visit those guys again. And then about 3 weeks later, the vice president of that company called me. And we had a very funny conversation, and he brought me into the building for a job interview. And it was the funniest job interview that I could imagine. He literally, he introduced himself and he said, hey, my company works on all of the biggest Hollywood movies and all of the biggest television shows in the world. And he said, unfortunately, one of my guys just quit out of the blue. We didn't see this coming. I now have to hire someone. And he looks at me kind of funny and he goes, I'm supposed to hire someone from New York or Hollywood with a big resume. And he said, but I'm kind of curious about you. And he just stared at me really funny. And he said, you have no skills, you have no experience, you're basically worthless to my company. But he just was really intrigued because even though I didn't work there, wasn't getting paid, I kept showing up at his front door with a big smile on my face, offering to help them. And he said, I'll tell you what, he said, the only thing you have is you seem hungry. Are you hungry? And I said, oh yeah, I'm hungry. And I went home and it was just like boiling in my head. I was just consumed with, oh my God, this is my dream, is to work on all the biggest movies and TV shows. How do I convince him that I really want this and that I am hungry? And when I was taking the trash out of my apartment, I saw in the dumpster the most perfect thing. And Rich, I dove headfirst into the dumpster and I got my hands around an old, filthy, disgusting work boot that someone had thrown away. And I brought it back to my little apartment and I made a dinner plate and a nice table setting. And I took a picture of myself cutting into the filthy, disgusting work boot like it was a sirloin steak. And I mailed him that picture. And in those days, I actually cut and pasted it because we didn't have computers. And I wrote underneath the picture, I said, does this answer your question? And his marketing lady, one of the directors of his company, told me weeks later, she said, when he saw that picture of you eating your boot, you got the job.
And that wasn't even your boot, just for the record.
It was filthy.
Having a high school degree, not having a college degree, and you're going into something that's very technical. Like this is a very skill oriented job. So you're not really trained for this. You, through persistence, you land yourself this job. And just to fast forward, give a list of, because you worked on Deadliest Catch for 15 seasons. Give a list of some of the other shows and big projects that you've done.
So I have flown in a helicopter or airplane with a camera system for Deadliest Catch, Survivor, The Amazing Race, every television network, CBS, NBC, ABC, CNN, HBO, ESPN. I am the helicopter cameraman of Monday Night Football. I've literally flown for every TV network in the world, including TMZ, if you can believe that. And really just every kind of show, everything from Hollywood movies to live sports, to documentaries, National Geographic. If it's out there, I've in some way been a part of it over the years. So
Monday Night Football, Carrie Underwood, or are we going with the old theme song?
I'm kind of an optimist. So I don't really, I kind of like everything. I definitely like the classic song, but I'm kind of open. Like when they change stuff like that, it doesn't offend me.
Oh man, I'm a Hank guy. I was like, it's like tradition, and Carrie Underwood's great. And actually it's a good opening to Monday night, but I'm like, man, for things like that, it's like, I love the Hank song. So,
well, yeah. And you have to understand, I can't hear the song during
I know
the
you
game
can't, I know, but
I'm in a helicopter. So the only thing I look forward to is the at the beginning is when they tell me we're on the air. Usually my shot is the first shot that opens the show, and B, hopefully the stadium has fireworks.
Yeah.
And I see the anthem and I see the fireworks come up, and then they'll do the kickoff. So that's what I look for.
Yeah, I saw your shot of your video of Lincoln Financial when you shot that and the fireworks going off and all that kind. It's got to be an exhilarating feeling to capture that, knowing like that every Monday night during football season, that is, that people are tuning in and they're seeing your shot first, essentially.
Yeah, it's an incredible honor to witness, to be a part of that stuff. And I'll tell you, the thing that I love about pro sports is that stadium and that TV audience is full of every race, creed, religion, every political party.
Yeah.
They're all watching and they're sharing this experience together. And it's a really magical thing to see millions of people come together, even at home, just to watch Monday Night Football and participate in it together. And it's an amazing, positive, for the most part, shared experience.
You know, I've traveled all over the world. I mean, I've been to about 60 countries. I've seen the poorest of the poor and some of the wealthiest of the wealthy. And it's interesting that no matter where you travel in the world, you find that we're way more similar than we are different. You know, people they crave the things that they need, like shelter and food and water and affection and, you know, like relationships. We need relationships with people. Like we all need people. And it's like you get to these, like when you start stripping things down to the bare necessities. I can be in a village in the middle of some island in Indonesia, and you find that communication is 90% nonverbal. And when you watch people's body language about how they interact, and if you can listen to somebody telling a story to a friend in a foreign language, and you could tell when they're getting excited or whatever, like it's like the same kind of thing. Like, oh, something bad happened there. I don't understand what's going on, but I can tell from the body language because it's the delivery. It's the same. It's crazy how similar people are in this world, but how divided we can become as a population of people globally. That is, you know.
Yeah, and I find that people want to be heard. They want to be listened to. So it doesn't even matter if you speak their language. If you pay attention to them, it's really neat how they just like open up and shine.
In the helicopter, there's typically a pilot, and then you're operating the camera. You're not piloting the helicopter. I don't know if that's been clear through our conversation. And so, you know, you're typically riding with the pilot, and there can be other people in the helicopter depending on what you're shooting for, or if you have other passengers or whatever. But of all the places that you've been, because you know, I've in your book, you talked a lot about Gibbs, him being a great friend to you, and several different helicopter pilots that you've worked with, some hairy situations that you've been in and stuff like that. Let me ask you, like, the worst situation you've been in, whether it was Deadliest Catch. You also worked on Ice Road Truckers, and because there was a story you told. I think this one was actually in your second book, which was your first book, but you told the story of like you were in the blizzard, and I don't know either way, but I don't know. We can get to that story later, but like, what's the hairiest situation you've been in flying these things? Because Deadliest Catch, when you're on the deck of that boat, man, that show, it's crazy. Because you gave a stat. How many was it? Like 6 people died in the first season. Is that what it was?
Yeah, 6 men died season 1 of Deadliest Catch before they even started fishing. So the boats were out, and I remember watching the expressions change because I happened to be in the little production office at the hotel in Dutch Harbor, and I was watching all the TV producers as radio calls were coming in that one of the boats had disappeared. It wasn't one of the boats on the show; it was a sister boat. And so on the show, you'll see the fishermen on camera. They're trying to get a hold of this boat, and they're not answering. They switched over and called the Coast Guard, and the Coast Guard said, "Well, we've received an EPIRB satellite beacon transmission from this location, so we're flying a C-130 there to check." And all the boats stopped what they were doing, and they headed to that location, and they found debris. So that boat had capsized and sunken so quickly that they didn't even have time to grab the radio and get a distress call out. That was season 1. That was before they had even been able to start fishing, and that is the most dangerous environment that I've ever flown in. And this is now my 17th year of flying there.
Whatever made that boat capsize that day, was that just a normal storm, or was there some sort of like major storm front that came through, like something that's abnormal?
Yeah, it was. I believe it was a rogue wave that hit the boat, and it was. It also one of the captains on Deadliest Catch told me that wave hit his boat as well. He also capsized, and he said the difference between my boat in the big valley is I still had my rudder in the water. So I was able to, so his boat is now sitting on its side. So all of his windows on that side of the boat are just down in the ocean.
Yeah.
But his rudder was still working, it was still in the water. So he used that to turn the boat around to the waves so that the waves could push him back upright. And then he had his guys throw all the pots off. You just get him off the boat because he needed that weight off the top of the boat
Yeah.
so they wouldn't capsize again. And
As it was rolling, it would continue rolling the opposite direction.
yeah, it's those crab boats in Alaska carry a lot of weight up top.
Yeah.
And so they can be a little unstable, especially if they start to build ice. And so everything you see on Deadliest Catch is what's really going on out there. And so on the show, you'll see guys carrying hammers and trying to beat the ice off the top of the boat so that it doesn't cause the boat with all that weight to flip over and sink.
Just when it's normally floating in the water.
It's just a dangerous environment. One of the men who died season 1, he actually fell off of a boat. So he fell overboard, and it was a best case scenario because they saw him go. You know, sometimes if you're fishing in Alaska, a wave, you know, or some piece of equipment will grab you, pull you over the side of the boat. And if no one sees you, they don't even know there's anything wrong. So this was best case scenario. They saw him go over the side. So at that point, one guy runs to the rail, and his job is to just keep eyes on that guy in the water as they try to start to maneuver the boat back to pick him up. And in this case, by the time they got the boat turned around and back over to him, he had already died from hypothermia.
Yeah, because it doesn't take long. What's the temperature of that water?
It's just above freezing.
Yeah.
So the shock of your body going into that water is so violent. I mean, you could have a heart attack right away.
How long does it take that boat to turn around to get them?
It takes a minute, and it's you know, it's very confused, especially in a storm.
Literally 1 minute, or are you saying it takes a minute as in a general frame of time reference?
I would estimate in the middle of a storm, it would take probably 2 to 3 minutes for them to turn the boat around and start to try to maneuver to pick him up. And that's a long 3 minutes when the water is that temperature. And I tend to believe that the better shape you're in, that's probably why you were getting so cold with your hands. The better shape you're in, the less cold you can tolerate because you don't have body fat. That body fat's important. And if you don't have a lot of body fat, I believe you get cold quicker.
I'm going to agree with you on that. And that's why it's not because I'm not tough. It's because I just keep my body fat in the single digits, and that's why I get cold. Okay, so back to my question then. You know, when you're shooting these things, like what like what's the toughest situation you've been in, storm, whatever, on one of these shows? Was it on Deadliest Catch? Like
Deadliest Catch is the worst environment that I fly in. And there is a story in Hell from Above of when our helicopter got lost in a storm over the Bering Sea at night. And basically, I shouldn't be here. I should be dead because the things that happened to us that night, most aircraft never return from those predicaments. And we just had one thing after another. Basically, unbeknownst to us, a storm had come on top of us. And so we're offshore, we're filming the boats at night. And I noticed that I was filming the fishing boat, the Wizard, which is this old World War II black ship that's now out crab fishing. And they have these huge sodium stadium lights on the top of the boat that light up the entire Bering Sea in front of them. And I noticed that the lights started to create shafts of light, like the bat signal in front of the boat. And I thought, ooh, okay, that means that the visibility is coming down. And my pilot, as he flew over the Wizard, he turned around to find the boat again so we could do another shot. And he said, ooh, because I didn't like that last turn. And I knew exactly what he was talking about, because what happened to him is he crossed over the boat, which is illuminated. As he left the boat behind him, he looked out in front of the aircraft and there was nothing there. There were no visual cues to tell him which way was up. So he panicked and he rapidly turned around so he could see the lights of the Wizard again. But for a second there, he did not know which way was up. And that's what killed JFK Jr., that type of disorientation. And I asked him, you know, because I'm getting nervous in the back of the helicopter. And I said, how much time do you have left before we got to refuel? And he said, I got about 10 minutes. And then I got to go back for fuel. And I said, let's go now. And he said, okay. And then I'll never forget these words. He said, let me see if I can figure out which way it is back to home. And I knew we were lost.
How far offshore are you guys? Because there's no like light reference back to land or
That
anything.
night, we were 15 or 20 miles offshore. And I immediately, as soon as he said that, I immediately started turning off all of my equipment, everything. I pulled the circuit breakers on my gyro stabilized camera system so that not even a power LED on one of the boxes would light up the inside of the helicopter and disrupt his night vision. Because I knew he was struggling to see outside the aircraft. And so he starts flying into the storm, and I'm looking over his shoulder, and I can't see anything in front of the aircraft. Nothing, not the light of a boat, not town, not a mountain. I can't see anything. And I asked him, I said, what are you flying to? And he said, I don't know. I thought it was the lights of town, but now I'm not sure. And that was it. I knew we were dead, because what's going to happen next is he's probably going to tumble into the ocean like JFK Jr. did, and or B, we're going to run out of fuel because we're not flying where he thinks we are.
Yeah, exactly.
And so I commanded him. I go, turn around right now and go back to our boats. And he knew that the boats are 20 miles offshore, so he can find them. But he knew that if he did that, we might crash in the ocean because we won't have enough fuel to go from the boats back to shore. But he didn't care. He turned that aircraft on a dime, and he flew back to the boats. And as we're flying back to the boats, I told the director of Deadliest Catch, I said, call the boats, tell them to turn all their lights on and to steam towards Dutch Harbor. And I told the pilot, I said, you watch the boats, they're going to give you the heading back to shore. And so the director said, okay, well, which boat should I call? And the pilot looked at him and screamed. He goes, pick one.
Call all of them.
And just the panic in his voice, I think, really told our director, who hasn't flown in as many aircraft as I have, how much peril we were actually in. So he called the boats. He said, turn on all your lights, steam towards Dutch Harbor. And I'll never forget, Captain Sig in the Northwestern was the first one back on the radio, flipped on his lights. He powered up that big, beautiful Marco Alaskan crab fishing boat, and he started steaming towards Dutch Harbor. He calls back on the radio and he says, hey guys, just follow me. I'll take you all the way to the dock. And that was when the pilot said, we don't have enough fuel, because at that rate of speed, we would just run out of fuel and crash in the ocean. So, and this was the thing about Captain Sig. People watch him on the show, and he's kind of a fan favorite, but he is wicked smart, and he knew exactly what was happening to us. He knew what was wrong. He knew what we had to do to survive. And he said, okay. He goes, no problem. He said, follow my heading. That will take you between the mountains to Dutch Harbor. And so we accelerated. We flew into the storm. And I'm sitting in the back of this now completely darkened aircraft, and I'm just listening to the rhythm of the Bell Jet Ranger aircraft, and I'm just waiting for us to either get home or crash in the ocean. I didn't know which way.
You had to be like every 3 seconds, like looking at that fuel gauge, like, oh, come on.
I'll tell you, it's being that close to death, it really focuses you, and it's just an amazing thing, when people who've been lost at sea talk about the feeling of coming home, or finding aid or refuge, or a helping hand. I know exactly what that means, because in that moment, those things are life. And so to see the lights of Dutch Harbor following Captain Sig's heading, and to set foot back on ground alive was just such an amazing feeling. And I can honestly tell you, I just had no complaints after that. I'm just happy to be here. And then I found the pilot later after everyone had left, and it was just he and I in the hangar. And I said, where were you going when we turned around? And he said, you know what? I got confused, and I think we were going offshore. And so when he said that, I realized that Had he not listened to me and turned around and flown back to our boats, I wouldn't be alive. And so people always, pick on the pilot and say, hey, he should have done this, should have done that. I've never faulted him, because when push came to shove, he made a very tough choice, and he listened to the people around him, and he got us home in one piece. And that's why I'm alive.
Yeah, it would be easy to not listen to the people around you because, I don't know, maybe I would be guilty of this and be like, hey, listen, I'm the pilot. You don't, I got way more flying experience. Run the camera, pal.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's because they tell me that sometimes. They say, Dave, quiet. I got to fly the aircraft.
Yeah.
And I go, okay. And he could have said that. He could have said, Dave, leave me alone. I'm busy. But he didn't. He listened. And even though he knew he might run out of fuel as a result, he made a difficult choice. He flew back to where our friends were. And then our friends helped us get home.
Yeah, you talked about some of there's some aircraft that have gone down in that area due to storms and stuff like that. Has there ever been any of the aircraft gone down like during the filming of the show, like another helicopter or anything like that during the actual filming?
Well, absolutely. I on one trip to Deadliest Catch, I went out, did my filming, just getting to Dutch Harbor, Alaska, where they filmed the Deadliest Catch, is an incredible journey. It's in the middle of nowhere.
This is your first trip out there?
No, this was probably my 10th.
Okay.
And I stepped on an airplane, which flew me from Dutch Harbor back to mainland Alaska in Anchorage. I stepped off the plane there. The plane turned around, flew back to Dutch Harbor, and crashed at the end of the runway and killed one of the passengers. Another season, I stepped on the airplane that took us home, and we took off into a storm, which is just a typical day in Dutch Harbor. That's how the weather is there. And the aircraft behind us that tried to take off crashed and sank to the bottom of the Bering Sea.
Where did I see that? Because I saw footage of that. You have footage somewhere with the actual aircraft on the bottom.
I do.
But where did you? That's on your. It's on your.
It's on my TikTok. It's on my Instagram, because people ask questions, and just like you just said, and they say, "Is it really dangerous?" And I go, "Sure." And I'll show a picture of a wrecked airplane. I'll say, "Well, I flew on this airplane right before it crashed." And they'll ask more questions. I'll say, well, here's another one that sank to the bottom of the Bering Sea. And right away in the comments, they'll say, that thing hasn't been in the bottom of the Bering Sea. So then I put up the video of this airplane sitting on the bottom of the Bering Sea underwater. And it's sobering. I think people, are so inundated with images and craziness and movies and TV shows. There's a little bit of them that says, no, that can't be that bad. They're just dramatizing it for TV. But the reality is Alaska is the last frontier. It really is that dangerous. And so much of life in Alaska can quickly become a life and death scenario, where down in other parts of the world, in the lower 48 of America, we just generally don't face those kind of risks.
Now, I remember my first trip to Alaska. I was young, and we were in this park, and we were looking for moose. None of us had ever seen a moose before. I didn't know how dangerous moose were. So we're going down this road. We get out of the car, and we're kind of like looking around and looking for like moose droppings and all this stuff, and trying to find a place where we might be able to see some moose. And then as we're walking in the forest, I look to my right, and there's this moose, and it's like, I don't know, maybe like 40 yards from us. And so I just start walking towards it. Like, I think like it's a horse. I can just go up and pet the moose or something like that. And I'm just walking like, doo-doo-doo. And my friends look at me like, what are you doing? I was, hey, there's a moose over here, man. Come on, let's get a photo with the moose. And they're like, no, you don't do that. And that's like something that, something as gentle looking as a moose from a distance, you realize that this is something that can quickly take your life. I mean, there are other things that you expect could, but if you don't know any better, something as simple as that, let alone things like weather and landscape and everything else.
Well, Rich, you're probably one of the most dangerous men I've ever talked to, and that moose will kill you quick.
Oh, I know that. I know that for sure. You know what's crazy though, talking about dangerous, is I was thinking about this is when I read in your book that 6 people died on the first season of the Deadliest Catch. And I thought, man, what if 6 people would have died in the first year that the UFC came into business? right? Like that would never fly ever. It just couldn't possibly happen.
That's what people expected.
Yeah, exactly. But if you look at the safety, if you look at the track record of just MMA in general, even organizations that, like, I mean, me working for One Championship, we have a lot of safety precautions, extra medical protocols that we do with our athletes, hydration for weighing, stuff like that. And it's like, but even organizations that don't have these extreme medical protocols for athlete safety, you still have a pretty good track record within the organizations as far as like any kind of deaths in competition or anything like that. And if there was just one, there would probably be like this outcry to just shut the entire industry down.
I know that fans get frustrated sometimes because they feel a fight's been stopped prematurely or in the wrong way. And that never bothers me because I understand, you guys as an organization, you're trying to make this sustainable. And yes, it's exciting. And yes, there is risk involved, but it actually is a little bit heartwarming for me to see that the organization is careful to make sure that the fighters are not permanently harmed. And if that means stopping a fight early, that's what it means, live to fight another day.
It's funny how I look at things from a different perspective now, because when I watch fights, like I actually watch it as if when I used to do that, it was a completely different life. Like that was not me. And so now when I watch fights, I'll be sitting there like, ooh, oh wow. Like watching, I don't know if you caught the Conor McGregor match, but when his leg broke, and him just, and I see that and I'm like, I can't even look at that stuff. Right. And this is a guy who does that as a living. And I probably wouldn't hesitate to jump back in and do it again. But then I think back of like the way that my thought process was when I was actually competing in my second Vanderlei fight. Like Vanderlei drops me towards the end of the second round, and man, he just about beats me within an inch of my life. And I remember having a discussion with the referee beforehand. I'm like, listen, if I get caught, I recover, like let this thing fly, cause I would have been upset if they stopped that match, and I ended up winning the match. But man, when I watch it now, I'm like, wow, that was pretty bad. So it's weird how the mind changes to a different perspective when you look at things, from a different looking glass.
Maybe I watch MMA differently than like other viewers, but honestly, it's amazing because getting hit that hard in the face, to me, it looks sometimes like if a guy gets kicked, it looks like getting clubbed with a baseball bat. I mean,
Yeah.
there's so much force involved with what they're doing. And I respect that. So when the ref steps in, it doesn't bother me because you got to be careful.
You're trying not to get kicked in the face, for the record, or punched. Like, people always say to me like, man, yeah, I can't believe that you like getting punched in the face. I'm like, well, I don't like getting punched in the face. It's just a job hazard. Like you don't like the thought of near death experiences either, but it's just part of the job hazard. You know what I mean?
Here's what I say about it. I have lost many friends and colleagues who've died in my industry while flying sometimes for TV shows and movies. And there are stories about that in my book, Help from Above. And I'm not, I miss my friends, but I also respect that they were doing what they loved. And I honestly believe that it's not how long you live, it's how you live. So if you're an MMA fighter and you're doing what you love and you're on that adventure that most people dream about, but never actually do, I admire that. If you're a helicopter pilot, you're flying in a storm and you're doing what you love and you've accepted the risks, of course, it's sad to me if there's an accident, something bad happens, but I also admire people who do what they love, who take risks, and who go on meaningful adventures and quests. I think that's what human beings are made for. We're as humans, we're not made to play it safe. So I definitely respect people, who march across the United States on their feet just to promote a cause that they believe in. Things like that, I believe that's the reason we're here.
Absolutely. If you're not doing something that's dangerous, how did you say that? I was trying to find it and I couldn't find it. How did your quote go? Because I loved it. It resonated with me.
I said, if what you're doing scares you, you're doing it right.
Exactly. I ran a travel show working for one championship, and we would travel around. And so my crew and I, we super tight family, and we would jokingly always say, like when we were shooting, it's like, man, we're shooting guys, speed first, safety second. Like it was like this joking phrase that we would always say. But yeah, and literally, like I think that's just how I live my life. Like I just live on the edge of a lot of things. Yeah, take things to the extreme. And so yeah, but I don't know if I get too scared about things like that. I think I'm I don't know, maybe too dumb to get scared of things sometimes. Perhaps, I don't know.
Well, I think you're living the dream. So,
Yeah.
it's especially in the US, we live in a affluent society where all risk has been removed from everything.
Oh yeah.
When I was a kid, we would ride in the back of my grandpa's pickup truck. Not only were there no seatbelts, there were no seats. We were
No.
just back there like potatoes.
On the highway.
I mean, just it was not a big deal. I sat in my dad's lap when I was probably 6 and steered the
Oh
car
yeah, yeah,
while he worked the pedals with his feet.
yeah,
And today, those kind of risks just aren't allowed.
yeah.
And I honestly can say that it there is a part of the human spirit that's getting stifled that way. And so, one of my best friends on planet Earth was killed in a helicopter crash, and it devastated me. I was depressed, but I also appreciate that he lived more in a single day of his life than some people have done in a lifetime. And I miss my friend, but I'm also glad that he did that.
I'm assuming you're referring to Gibbs. And when I was reading about that, it reminded me a lot of my dad's death, because my dad died unexpectedly at the age of 56 from a sudden heart attack. But I mean I miss him, but when I reflected on his death, like I watched both of my grandmothers die of cancer. And when you watch somebody go through this process, when you watch a woman like my grandmother, she was not exactly a small woman. She was probably like 240, 250 pound woman. And to see somebody like that go down to 80 pounds, and just wither away, like it's a terrible thing. So, seeing my dad having passed away at the age of 56, but being able to do everything that he did all the way up till the day he died, he was still cutting grass and riding his motorcycle and going on poker runs and charity things and all this different stuff that he did. It was, I'm like, man, he lived life exactly the way he wanted to, because to have watched my dad go through some process like cancer, it would have broken him as a person. He would have been miserable. He would have been the grumpiest old miserable man I could possibly think of, but it would have broken my spirit as well. So yeah, I mean, I say that, my Christian attitude, like it's different for me. Like I don't view death that way. I literally view death as a passing from a physical realm into a spiritual realm. I believe, like, I mean, the act of dying scares me. I wouldn't want to be like, I don't know, painfully dying, like the process of dying, going through some painful process. But I believe that like once those eyes shut and you're going to open them in the spiritual realm in a different dimension, and suddenly just be like, whoa, what just happened? It might actually take you a second. Like, what's going on here? Like, oh, I must be dead. But I view a passing as like, man, I'm like, the moment that I'm done here, man, I'm gonna wake up in heaven. So if I knew that I was gonna go to sleep tonight and die, like I'm like, cool, I've lived more lifetimes than I could possibly imagine here. And I tell people all the time, like, if a cat has 9 lives, if I live like a cat, I've probably burned at least 8 of them, so I'm good to go. And so yeah, I have a different outlook on death, man. To me, it's just a passing from one dimension to another.
I think fear of death is natural and normal and healthy, but sometimes it can be carried too far. I think, some people miss their calling because they're afraid to take a risk. There are people who work in cubicles and restaurants who are stuck in their daily grind, and they're not doing the thing that they love because they're so busy doing other things. And I find that when I talk to 9 out of 10 people, they clearly know why they're here. And for most of them, it's not what they're doing. It's not what they, spend their days with. And so whether you want to be an MMA cage fighter and risk life and limb for your, adventure of the sport, whether you want to fly in an aircraft, go to space. Okay, that's a risky thing. Richard Branson just flew in his spaceship up into space and came back home. but there are risks involved with that. But if that's what he dreams of doing, I think that's what he should do. And I'm sad if something bad happens to him, but I'm more glad that he did it. You know, he didn't just wonder what would happen if he had ever had the balls to do it. He did it. And so I admire that, and I really think that's the way to live.
If you know my backstory, like I was a high school math teacher. And so, and when I decided to leave teaching, like I was the only child in my family to graduate from college. So it was a big deal to my dad. Like my dad was like, look, my son, he's actually smart. He's not like me. And when I graduated from college, when I told my dad that I was going to walk away from my teaching career, he was like, you're just going to throw away your education. And this was in the early 2000s. This was at a point in time where thinking about actually really making a living in the world of MMA would have been like thinking, oh yeah, I can become a helicopter camera operator just having a high school degree. It was ridiculous. The thought of it was just ridiculous. But me being young and thinking like, nope, I'm not going to let that stop me. I'm going to do this thing. And then of course, like the rest is history. I had a great career. But you know, without the ability to consider the risk and just be like, you know what, I'm going to do this. I'm going to take the risk and I don't have a plan B. Like, I mean, my plan B was just to go back to teaching. Like, fortunately, I was educated and I could always go back if I needed to. But, you know, it's like, no, it's either this or nothing. Like, if this doesn't work for me, then I don't know what I'm going to be doing. Now, oddly enough, you know, you talk about your purpose for being here. I don't think my purpose for being here was to compete, win world championship or anything like that. Life has kind of come full circle for me because I was trained as a teacher, and that's kind of what had motivated me to begin this podcast in the first place. Is I have the ability to, you know, educate, inform, change people, you know, like give people a different perspective, talk about things, you know, discussions like that we're having about, you know, telling people like, forget about the risks sometimes, or at least, you know, do a risk analysis, but don't be afraid of taking risks. Like these are the kind of messages that people need to hear. So disseminating information like this to people is really like valuable. So it almost as if like life has come like back around full circle to what I was like, I guess maybe meant to do is that is teaching. And so I think perhaps I got off track with this fighting career for a little while, only to come back to what I was supposed to do as a teacher.
That's what I love about your show. I I wait every 2 weeks for you to have a new episode. And one day I was sitting there and I thought, oh, I wonder who the next guest is going to be on Rich Franklin's podcast. And it just like washed over me. I go, oh, it's me. I'm going to be on this show.
Well,
No, I love that you share stories like that, because everything that you just said, there are millions of families going through that right now. There are millions of kids telling their dads what they dream of doing. And there are a million of dads, you know, some of whom are saying, no, 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 no. You can't make money that way. You got to go to college and you got to spend 4 to 6 years of your life locked in an institution. And then you can start at the bottom of some giant corporation because that's, you know, they love their children. They want them to have food and make money and have shelter. And that's how you do it. And so I love that you shared that story, because I think it benefits so many kids and parents to hear the story of how you jumped off of the train that everyone else is on to go pursue your dream of competing in MMA.
It's crazy how quickly we can become institutionalized with these kinds of things, with jobs, school, all that kind of stuff. That you know, there was I saw in the news maybe last week that Biden was signing a bill that was erasing like student loan debt for a lot of the millennials that have taken out loans. And it's like, yeah, because these people were brainwashed into thinking that was the only successful path you could have. I'll give you a great example. Thinking about my teaching career, you know, as I could have come out of high school and I could have been making like, you know, say $30,000 a year at this factory that was right by the high school where I graduated. Like right out of high school, I could have been making $30K right off the bat. But instead I decided to go to college. I go to college. I spend 5 years in college getting my teaching degree. So I missed out on 5 years of income at $30K a year. So roughly $150,000. I roughly spent about $20,000 a year going to school by the time I paid for, you know, my college tuition, like living all these different kind of things. Now, some of those costs overlap. They're not completely mutually exclusive, but just for the ease of numbers. So 5 years of that is another $100K. So over a 5 year course of time, I've now missed out on $250,000. And I came out of college, and what my first year teaching, you know what I made? Like $28,700, less than what I would have made at that factory. At which point I probably would have moved from like $30,000 to like, I don't know, $35,000 or $36,000. Right. So it's even more money. And so it would have taken me perhaps my entire teaching career just to mitigate that loss. Right. And so you look at like one of the lost arts in this world is like trade schools, people that have just skills like HVAC or something like that. Like you can go into HVAC, take a few business courses, learn how to run a small business. And within 5 to 10 years, you could be running your own HVAC company, employing 10 to 15 people, making 10 times the amount of money that you would have made, even if you decided, like, I have a friend of mine that he does landscaping for a living. And, he'll walk into a hotel and get a room, and he will have rented like, the presidential suite or something like that. Makes really good money. And of course he's walking in all dirty, muddy boots and all that kind of stuff. And he doesn't look like the doctor or the lawyer, he's not driving a BMW, but he's driving a truck that's all outfitted with everything else. But his income is probably triple of these guys. And, and that's like the world has, like, we've been brainwashed into believing like the only solution is a college degree. It's crazy.
Well, and your friend, if he didn't go to college, he may not have $500,000 of college loan debt.
Exactly.
That a lot of people come out of school with. And I'm so glad, because you're so good at math. I'm so glad that you taught that lesson right now.
Oh, yeah.
Because I don't tell kids not to go to college. I just share with them my story.
Yep.
It's in my book. Is how I started sweeping the floor.
Yep.
And literally, but more importantly, in a sense, getting paid to sweep the floor and to learn my job. That's how I started my career versus paying someone else to train me for some job I may never have, because there are things that require a college degree. However, most people who I talk to when they come out of college, primarily what they have is debt. And I would say less than 50% of them are doing the thing that they went to school for.
Yep.
What's that cost?
Exactly. Well, that's the whole thing. Like, granted now, I'll just say this, like, even though I went to school for education, you could argue that being, I'm not technically using what I went to school for, but I will say that the education that I got, like, I was a math major as well. So I'm a very numbers oriented guy, which has helped me, like the logical reasoning skills that I learned in my math degree, believe it or not, actually helped me in competition. I mean, like the way that I analyze an opponent and break my opponent down, like my coaches and we would set up these matrices where I would look at myself, like my strengths versus my weaknesses and my opponent's strengths versus my weaknesses. And I would start plugging things. And okay. And I would look like how my strengths matched up with his strengths, with his weaknesses, my weaknesses, comparing that. And I would have this matrix of like how things matched up. And I'm like, okay, here's my path of least resistance. And this is a way that I would approach actually a fight, which is very analytical and kind of mathematical in nature. And so did my degree help me? I'm sure it did, but I didn't go to school. That's not, I'm not using the degree for what I went to school for, even today, and so here I am, I fast forward, I'm like, I came from a small town outside of Cincinnati, Ohio, thinking I'm going to teach high school and I'll probably teach for the next 30 years and then, get my retirement and the white picket fence, the 1.7 dogs, the 2.4 kids and live in the American dream. And then suddenly I do what I do. I'm living in Singapore at some point in my life. Like I'm all over the world. And so it's like nothing like where you think you're going to be. So even these kids that you're going to college and stuff and you're trying to plan your whole life out, it's like, yeah, that might work for you for the next several years, but you'll be given an opportunity. You're going to send somebody a picture of yourself eating a boot and it changes your life, and next thing you know, you're, I don't know, filming in the middle of a forest fire. And it's like, how did I end up in this spot in my life? Right. I didn't even go to school for this type of thing. So,
well, I'm not good at math. When I was in school, I was one of those kids that said, while I'm doing trigonometry, and all these letters and numbers, and I'm going, when am I going to need to use this in life? Well, I'm not like you. I've never used it ever.
Yeah.
I've never used it. That all of those years of math classes do not benefit me.
No.
And it's not that I'm against college in any way. It's simply that I understand that if you're like 9 out of 10 kids coming out of high school, you have no idea what you're going to want to do in 10 years. And trying to guess and spend several $100,000 for an education that you may not end up really using is maybe not the next best step.
I'll tell you, that's one of the things I like about like European culture, for example. A lot of those kids do gap years, and which is gap year essentially is a year between high school and college where you save up some money and then you pretty much travel for the year. They'll travel the Eurail, go into hostels or whatever. They might hit South America. A lot of them go to Southeast Asia, where I've spent a lot of my time. And you see these kids, and it's a year for you to just kind of figure out what it is that you want to do. It's so smart, man. Like because you start looking at the world from a different perspective. I mean, I'll tell you, when you suddenly travel through a village of people that don't have fresh water and have to walk 2 hours a day filling containers to get fresh water, you start really kind of reconsidering things like, how important is all this other stuff, or what do I really want to do? And, or it just, it changes your perspective completely. So, and I'm sure you've had plenty of that because, you've shot so many different things. Like this reminds me of you shooting, you talked about covering, like, for example, like Hurricane Katrina in your book. And I mean, the aftermath of all that and what that devastation was like and everything. And something like that has to give you a different perspective on life.
I'll tell you what it does. It makes you appreciate how close we are to survival situations. And just let me give you an example. So Hurricane Katrina happened. The city after the storm, because the hurricane did not hit New Orleans. People have probably forgotten that. The hurricane sidestepped New Orleans. It dumped a bunch of rain and wind on New Orleans, but it was after the hurricane that the levees started to fail. And because the pumps were damaged and not operating, they were not able to keep the water, which sits above the city, out. And so the water slowly seeped into the city and day after day went higher and higher until it was above the roofs. And now it's a real life and death predicament because I looked at the guys I was traveling with to fly in this news helicopter above the now abandoned city of New Orleans. And I said, "Did you guys bring guns?" And they looked around kind of embarrassed and they said, "If we had known, we would have brought guns." And, and so I think it's easy to have a false sense of security in most of, like the United States, where everything seems pretty safe. But the reality is you can, like New Orleans, you can suddenly find yourself in a life and death scenario where maybe laws aren't being followed. And like you said, maybe there is no water to drink that won't make you sick. Suddenly you may have a need for food that you don't have. And so I definitely don't take anything for granted.
Yeah, I'm a bit of a prepper myself. Like I have, my land here, I have like fresh water on my land. I have access to food. I can hunt. So I have that mentality of like prepping. But you mentioned like people not following laws. Talk to me about, I'm going to shift gears here. Talk to me about the organized crime ring and how you basically end up becoming a crime fighter in this organized crime ring. Like, give the essence of the story of this, because this is your first book, otherwise known as your second book.
Yeah, that's probably what people don't even realize when they're reading my books, is that I started writing books and I started going on social media and telling stories and on podcasts. Thank you very much. I started to do that because of criminal activity observed at a school bus stop in a little town in California. And I have a backwards journey to be sitting in front of you on the Rich Franklin podcast. I had no interest in going public. I had no interest in being in the public eye or being on social media. I was simply trying to make my neighborhood safe. And I live on a mountain above Los Angeles in a tiny little town with a full-time population of about 100 people.
Yeah. By the way, until I read your book, I lived out in LA for a couple of years. And I didn't even know Skyforest was out there. So when I read, I'm like, I Google mapped it. I'm looking at photos. I watched the video of you actually driving up through the clouds. We did the same thing down in Malaysia when we hiked, my team and I, we hiked Mount Kinabalu. And as you're driving through the road, like you'll hit like the cloud range where you end up going through the clouds at one point. But yeah, like I when I Google mapped your place and looked at some of the images of that city, I was like, this is beautiful, man. Your space up
It's
there, which
surreal.
surprised me even more after I had kind of made my way through the book a little bit, and I'm like, how is something like this happening? Because all this organized crime and everything that was at this bus stop in your neighborhood, that's a seemingly like kind of a bit has that like off grid, very country feel. Because when you start talking about it, I'm like, where does this exist out in LA? Like, this is bullcrap. Like, I'm thinking like Hollywood Hills or something. You found some gym up there, and then it's a little further up north and whatnot. But yeah, and then when you start talking about this organized crime ring, I'm like, wait, because people expect this to be in the quote unquote bad neighborhoods.
It shocked me at first because I literally live in one of the safest neighborhoods in America. And when my neighbors started telling me that there was some weird activity and strange looking dudes at the school bus stop, I looked at them and I said, "In Sky Forest?" And they go, "Yeah, there's these scary looking guys hanging around the school bus stop." I thought, okay, so my town is so small. If you throw a ball, you might leave city limits real quickly. That's how small this town is. And so I walked around the corner and I'm at the school bus stop. And sure enough, there's a bunch of scary looking dudes. It looks like America's Most Wanted, all mean mugging around the school bus stop, and the children of all ages are right there waiting for school buses. So I walk over and I ask the nearest gangster. I say, "What kind of business is this?" And he looks me up and down and he goes, "We can't tell you. It's a secret." And if that was supposed to scare me away, I mean, I'm not a fighter like you, but I can honestly tell you every time they did that to me at the school bus stop, it got a primal response from me. So if it's fight or flight, it was fight that came out of me. And from the deepest part of my being, uh, I didn't get violent, but I stood my ground. I didn't move. And I think that's what
Yeah.
confused the bad guys the most because they knew how to fight, but they didn't know how to talk to someone who talked politely back to their
Yeah.
violent threats. And so I became a puzzle that it sort of intimidated them, that when they would come at me, I wouldn't move and I would stare right in their eyes and I would say, "Do you know where you are? You're at a school bus stop." And some of these guys, I know one for sure, one of them was on a Most Wanted poster.
Yeah.
And he now works at this secret business at a school bus stop in his tiny little town. And I, like I said, I'm not a fighter like you. I don't, I don't, I don't have those tools. Okay. So I just suddenly found myself in this predicament of these bad guys are here now at the school bus stop. They won't even tell me what their business is. And they're trying to scare me away. And I'm not going to move. It's like if you present a threat in the realm of innocence of little kids or even high school kids, and you tell me to get lost, that's the last thing I'm going to do. And so I went the other way. I started calling meetings of my neighbors.
Yeah.
Bring everyone together, say, "Hey, there's some kind of secret business with a bunch of scary looking dudes at our school bus stop. What should we do?" And at first I would have 40 and 50 people all cheering at the meetings. "Yeah, let's do this. Let's do that. Let's fix this. Let's make the kids safe again." And as one by one, the people were targeted for retribution, the meetings got smaller and smaller. So within 6 months, I'm the only one at the meetings. And so now I'm in a situation where I understand it's dangerous. I understand this is an organized crime ring. And I understand it's dangerous to be seen causing a problem for them. But I have to do this because my own son lives here. Okay. He was 3 years old when this started, but I knew eventually he'd be old enough to ride that bus. And I just couldn't allow him to grow up in a town where it's not safe to stand at the school bus stop. And so I wound up, among other things, having to start to write books. And
You
so that's where the Help from Above series of books came from.
Yeah, you talked about it in this whole this crime ring. Like this was a combination of gang activity mixed with police, like corrupt police and dirty politicians, all simultaneously, like all within, like was it Bernardino County there? Or what is the county that
San
you live in?
Bernardino County.
Yeah, and so all this stuff was like mixed together in this situation.
Yeah, it's you know, what can I tell you? You're talking to the one guy in the neighborhood who has no interest in politics, no interest in city hall, no interest in the school board. And yet I wound up where it became the center of my life because I simply couldn't allow the kids to be left in harm's way while these Goombas did whatever illegal business they were doing. And in the book, I refer to them as the "Don't fuck with us" gang. Sorry, you may have to bleep that, but that's how they presented themselves to neighbors of the school bus stop. They would, you know, rumble around to people's homes and beat on the doors. And when the Skyforce residents opened their door, these big monstrous dudes would say, "Hey, we're over here. Don't F with us." And so that's what I call them in the book, is the "Don't F with us" gang. And that terrified people.
It's great that you actually spoke up about this, because it kind of reminds me of, like, just to kind of simplify things a little bit. It's like a situation in bullying. Like, I taught high school and I've seen kids that have gotten bullied before, and you have your bullies and you have the kids that are getting bullied, and like any bell curve distribution, right? The masses are in the middle. These are the people that you call them the bystanders or whatever. And if these people are quiet, if they give no voice in this thing, then you have like this 65% of the people in the middle that just do nothing. And so you have the outliers over here on one side picking on the outliers over here on the other side. And it really is just like a minority of the population. And the majority is they're the people who have the ability to make the change. So in a situation like this, like, you know, you have all these members of the community, they're in the majority, like everybody wants change. You have this minority of criminals in essence, and you have this minority of people that really just don't care, but everybody else is like you. However, most of those people, an overwhelming percentage of these people that are in the middle, just don't ever do anything. So whether it's like, you know, you're trying to stop crime, or you want to stop a bully from picking on somebody, you want to make change politically, anything like that, it's, you know, these people just, yeah, nothing. That's why change never gets done. So that's a great example of how to make change.
I think that's one of the most important lessons of my second book, What Lies Above the Clouds, is that nothing can prepare you for how lonely that is. And I think people need to know that. They need to know that sometimes if you stand up for what's right, in this case, making children safe at a school bus stop, if that's not politically popular, your own friends and family and neighbors may yell and scream at you to stop. And that's kind of how this went, because people were so terrified of these gangsters that, and not only did they stop fighting against it, but they targeted me. They attacked me because they felt that me standing up to them and publicly causing them a problem might possibly uh, result in them getting hurt. And I'll never forget. I mean, I would not only get phone calls from people I don't know telling me to stop asking questions about the school bus stop. I would get phone calls from my own neighbors screaming profanity at me. I could set the phone down and still hear every word. And the reason they're screaming at me is because they feel that anyone publicly standing up to these gangsters could cause a problem for them. It could cause them to lose money. It could cause them to come into harm's way. And I just, I could have used you during those days, because not that I want you to beat anyone up, but I just needed someone, anyone other than me, to just stand up and not move. When these gangsters, mean mug you and tell you they're going to kill you and tell you to get lost, I just needed people who were willing to stand up to them and to pressure them until, hopefully the light of public knowledge would cause them to have to clean up their act. and either pick a legal business or at least move somewhere else and leave the kids alone.
Yeah, I've always been the kind of person that would like bite my nose off to spite my face before I would just sit and do nothing. Like I'm not going to lose freedoms, or I'm not going to live in fear, or whatever this is applicable to. I'm not going to do that kind of stuff. So, look, Dave, I know we're running out of time here. Where can people pick up your book? Give them the website. Go ahead, plug what you need to plug here.
Well, I definitely recommend the audiobooks because it's me reading my own story.
Yeah.
But Help from Above, What Lies Above the Clouds, you can find them on Amazon, iTunes, Audible, and you can find me on any social media. Look for David Allen Arnold, ALAN.
Listen, I think that book is really important because it's a realization that you take a town like Sky Forest and you see that things like this are happening in this small town. They're happening in small towns everywhere, right? Like in the most unassuming places.
Amen.
And that's what people have to realize. So I mean that's my takeaway from this thing. So listen, David, I appreciate you coming on, man. Awesome conversation. Had a good time. Covered a lot of stuff, and it's been really fun, man.
I'm a big fan of yours, Rich, and I love you. I love your show, and it's a huge honor for me to be on here with you and talk to your audience.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it, and thanks for being persistent on my social and having your agent reach out and everything. So yeah, it's good stuff.
Thank you so much. It's an honor.
We'll chat soon, buddy.
Okay, see ya.
Take care.
Quite Franklin is providing this podcast as a public service, but it is neither a legal interpretation nor legal advice, nor a statement of Quite Franklin policy. Reference to any specific product or entity does not constitute an endorsement or recommendation of that product or entity by Rich Franklin or Quite Franklin. The views expressed by guests on the podcast are their own, and their appearance on the program does not imply an endorsement of them or any entity they represent. Views and opinions expressed by Quite Franklin employees or representatives are the views and opinions of the persons expressing them, and do not necessarily reflect the views or opinions of Quite Franklin or any of its officials or principals. Nothing heard on this podcast at any time is medical advice or is intended as medical advice. The listener must always consult his or her personal physician or other qualified medical professional regarding any questions of a medical nature. If you have any questions about this disclaimer, please contact our general counsel.